So week 11, reason versus intuition from Rays of the One Light, weekly commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it and your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. Jesus, when addressing his critics, appealed to reason and common sense. In his training of the disciples, however, like all great masters, encouraged them the development of a higher faculty, soul intuition. For it is only by intuition that spiritual perceptions are achieved. In chapter 16 of the Gospel of St. Matthew, we find Jesus drawing on the intuition of his disciples by asking them who they thought he was in reality. They immediately understood what he wanted from them was a subtle answer, not some obvious reply based on his nationality, sex, and the like. Peter it was, at last, who understood and answered the question on its intended level, the spiritual. Thou art the Christ, he said, the Son of the living God. And Jesus turned to him, saying, Blessed art thou, Simon, son of Jonah, for not by human nature was this truth revealed to thee, but by my heavenly Father. And I tell thee this also, thou art Peter, which is to say, a rock, and upon this rock will I build my church, and never will the powers of darkness overwhelm it. Jesus was pleased with his disciple for relating to the question on its deepest level. Reason could not have given Peter that answer. The answer came through the faculty of soul intuition and proved him thereby to be a spiritually advanced disciple. It was his intuitive perception, that insight which cannot be shaken by the tempests of reason, which cannot be shaken by the tempests of reasonable doubt, that Jesus praised in referring to him as a rock. The church he referred to next was the edifice of cosmic consciousness. Any outer church institution would have to depend, as in fact the Christian churches have always done, on the level of understanding of its individual leaders and members. Peter's intuitive perceptions could never have been passed on to an outward succession of prelates. Clarity comes by direct soul perception. Confusion results from excessive dependence on reason as the guide to understanding. As the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita states, when your intellect at present, confused by the diversity of teaching in the scriptures, becomes steadfast in the ecstasy of deep meditation, then you will achieve final union with God. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om. Oh. Om. It's so good to be with you, and it is a really extraordinary altar. The energy, Keshava was asking me about chants this morning and if I was drawn to any, and he said, if I didn't have a specific one, he would go with the energy of Krishna that's just filling this space. It was such a joyful beginning, the chanting, so powerful, right? And it was reminding me as I was listening to it that there's a quality of that is really reflected in intuition, of going with a direction. Right, feeling the energy, and rather than fighting it or trying to come up with something else on a logical level, oh, this makes sense, I'll do this. And in a way, you could say, well, it would make sense, but not necessarily. It didn't necessarily make sense to follow that, but on an intuitive level, it did. It did make sense. So I was appreciating that. And when Swami was talking about in the reading today of the difference between, the reasonable doubt, like how the mind can try to guide us, versus actually perceiving something, spiritual truth, that Christ could only be perceived on a soul level. You couldn't know him as Christ if you were with Jesus and simply relating to him on a human level. It's been said that, it always makes me smile when I think about it, that there was someone who met Master and said, "Oh, I met him. He was a very good cook." And it's kind of extraordinary to think that could happen, that you could meet him and think that about him. Like, oh, yeah, he was a very good cook. He was a good cook, that's what I've heard. But of course, he was so much more than that. But it's our own consciousness. It's where we are that allows us to see something, to perceive something, to know something. It's very interesting when I was reflecting on the reading where Swami talks about this rock, right? That Peter, it's a rock of cosmic consciousness, that it cannot be shaken. And as I reflected on that, and I was rereading a book that I love by Swami's, called Intuition for Starters. It's really a beautiful book if you haven't read it. And if you've read it and feel at all inclined, I just recommend it. Every time I read it, I feel like I dive deeper and deeper into very clear teachings about how do we recognize intuition, what are practices that we can do to deepen it, to strengthen it in our lives, and what's the difference between the mind on a conscious level that would analyze something, pull the facts together and sum it up in a certain way, which is not the same as intuition, right? And I was reflecting, so many different stories came to mind, but I was thinking of some amazing stories Shanti has shared in her medical practice of intuition. That she, it's not that she had all the symptoms laid out with someone and could, from the book, oh, I know this is going on for this reason. She just felt, this is going on, right? And sometimes the feeling was, this is a grave situation that must be addressed immediately. And I just remember one of her stories about that. And the rock, that, there was nothing going to move that knowing in her and the insistence in her to the patient, you must go to the hospital now, not go home and call the doctor. No, now you must go. And it proved to be true, right? It proved to be true. So it was so interesting also that our affirmation is willpower. Because one of the things that Swamiji talks about is in order to draw intuitive guidance, we need a lot of energy. We have to be cultivating a sense of dynamic will, which is not this, Master said, but this, right? So in the yogic path, willpower is willingness. A willingness to develop ourselves, live the yogic lifestyle, practice the tools, and then be open to the opportunities that come to us, be discerning about them, be open in seeking grace. I love one of the talks, and Lahari's talk today was so beautiful, in purification. It's the receptivity of the heart. Right? That intuition, it's there for us. The masters are always here. We had this beautiful Mahasamadhi celebration recently for Yogananda, and the idea that he's still living, right? The masters are still living. They don't need to be in their bodies, right? And sometimes, many people spoke of this with Swami Kriyananda. When he left his body, many people felt he was much more accessible suddenly. He no longer was in a geographical place, right, that you were relating to. He suddenly was everywhere. And this is the truth certainly of the masters, of Swamiji, of highly evolved souls. They're present, but it's also the truth of us. We don't die. The physical body goes away. We don't go away. So intuition is on a subtle level, but when we have accessed it, it's as firm and steady and solid as a rock a rock of cosmic consciousness. One of the things that Swamiji talks about related to intuition is there's calmness. So it's very calm. Doesn't mean you aren't firm. But the urgency is not agitation. It's not excited energy. It's very firm, it's very clear. There is a quality of joy that can be found in intuition. So calmness, clarity, and joy are the three elements that he highlights in terms of perceiving and knowing. But I really found, as I reflected on this reading today, paired with willpower, and Swami saying that Jesus was identifying Peter as one, because of soul perception, he would not be swayed by reasonable doubt. And it's been my experience that that's one of the greatest challenges to following intuition, is the reasonable doubt that will come. Well, how do you know? How do you know? How do you know that's the right thing? What's telling you that's the right thing? And when it's intuition, it comes from a place of calm, steady, I believe this is so. And Swami said that in the practice of intuition, and he encouraged us to make it a practice in our lives, start with small things, which is the same with willpower, developing that. Don't take on the biggest challenge, but begin to practice a receptivity of open listening for guidance. I like to practice it in very little ways. When I drive, which lane shall I be in? And especially on the way to the temple. So part of what I hold is that it doesn't mean I'll get there faster, right? Because who knows why that would be the right lane. I don't know what God's plan is for me. But I do often watch how it happens, but I play with it in a way. It's a game that I play. But the intention of that is to practice asking in every endeavor, in every situation, to invite God in, to say, how shall I move forward? How would you have me do this? What is the best choice in this moment? And that practice, for me, the driving is delightful to just watch how I'll feel it and my mind will think, that doesn't make any sense. That lane's longer, there's more cars. And I'll just ask myself, or are you asking? Are you gonna follow it? I'll follow it, and very often, suddenly 3 cars leave the lane. Go, yeah, that is interesting how that happens. And it happens a lot. So if you ever are behind me, what is she doing? Why is she changing lanes so often? Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I'll just stay in this one. And I'll think, really? Stay in this one. So anyway, the idea is that we can be guided, and it's a deep part of the yogic lifestyle to commit ourselves to a practice of deep listening, of asking to be guided. Asha tells the story of getting frustrated at a certain point, teaching intuition, and just feeling like she wasn't able to teach anyone how to do it. She'd teach all the guidelines. I don't know if this particular book I'm mentioning had been written yet, but anyway, in a moment, she told Swamiji in a check-in call, I'm not teaching intuition anymore. And he challenged her and said, intuition is essential, attunement, right? Which they go together, attunement and intuition. So it may have been a class on attunement, but in saying, you must teach this, even if people get it wrong. And one of the things that Swamiji said is don't worry about that so much. Move the energy. Take small steps, hear it, take a step, see what happens. Hear it, take a step, see what happens. Part of the evaluation last week, the reading talked about, the fruits, like what comes from the fruits of actions, and true teachings bears good fruit. So for me, one of the practices is the 8 aspects of the divine. And I'll just pay attention, can't always tell right away, but is the result of whatever I'm being guided to do, does it pan out in terms of bringing more light or bringing more joy to my consciousness, to the situation? You can't always tell, but it has been my experience that the more that I trust the intuition, the more I move forward, the more there is the feedback. The other thing is asking for help in it. And I find that to be not only essential in my life, but I'm so grateful for my teachers in Ananda who demonstrate the same principle and say that to me, right? That a big decision is before them and they can feel, this one I don't want to make by myself. It's too important. I'm going to seek help from another teacher, another minister, a trusted mentor, that I can bring that to them and ask, here's what I've come to. Can you please guide me? Allowing God, Lahari was saying, we're all channels of light. We all have that capacity. So to be willing to ask someone else to be a channel for the divine for you. Say, I'm trying to understand, is this the right choice in my life? Could you give me a sense of your perception? And then the song, Go On Alone or Walk Like a Man, I can't remember what we titled it now, but it was so beautiful, that musical piece. And again, the power that's required to be a rock. Because once you're guided, it hasn't happened often to me, but I have had the experience of having someone, dear friend, not be sure about the guidance I received. Not be certain that, are you sure this is a good choice? And what happened in that interaction, the more that my friend challenged it, the more convinced I felt. I wasn't agitated, but I did feel this powerful surge of energy. And at the end, he said, well, maybe it is intuition, right? It involved a decision with James and I, so later I talked to James to make sure. Then I thought, okay, I better check this out. Because the whole time I was saying, no, it's the right thing, it's the right thing. And my friend, I appreciate, was just, without saying, are you sure it's not your ego? He was really saying that. So when I mentioned it to James, he got so strong. This is the right decision. This is the right choice. I thought, oh, okay, well then I'm not convincing you of anything, which is a really important part of navigating life intuitively. Am I imposing my intuition on someone else? Part of this cooperative obedience that we practice within Ananda is, again, listening to one another. Right? And as Haridas famously has said, it turns out there's two God's wills. So, what do you do when one intuition is this way and another intuition is the other? It's not easy to, I would say, more discernment, more conversation, more exploration. Right? But with Yogananda's Peace and Harmony prayer comes to mind. Like, tune into this higher vibration of peace and harmony, and that will help guide you. And maybe sometimes bring others in. But later I was sharing this story with Asha, and she said to me, occasionally we need opposition to strengthen our truth. I thought, oh, that's interesting, because it happened, right? Like that happened. Like that was the blessing, also the blessing of my dear friend to speak honestly to me. That's not easy. To say, I'm not sure, are you? And to just keep challenging me throughout, but it was very true when Asha said that, that's what happened. And I saw it for James as well. We suddenly realized this is a rock that we're standing on. And we don't know the outcome, which is challenging for intuition. We don't know the outcome. So, but we're guided in a sense of direction. We feel an inner calmness of truth. And when we're talking about God, to me, that's one of the most vulnerable areas of any of us. It's been my pleasure, my honor, my joy to work with others, to sit with others as they discern their spiritual life. And I've really seen how vulnerable it is to share with another. These are my beliefs, or this is what, they're trying to come to terms with. What is my path? Is this my path? That moment, and not just that moment, but other moments, of listening for divine guidance. And the vulnerability, because we hear this in the teachings all the time, God cannot be known on a conscious level. I can't add up all the facts to prove God to anyone. So what do I do when someone just says, oh, that's just a story you tell yourself to comfort yourself? Or some people really feel that way. They feel that way about God. And I remember when I had been on the spiritual path for quite a while before Ananda came into my life, yoga came into my life. Nevertheless, it was a new direction that didn't make sense to the logical mind at all. So there was a vulnerability in it for me. And I remember Savitri was talking to me, and I've heard this teaching repeated. It just feels relevant to this conversation. She said, Master, and she probably said Yogananda, not Master, but she said, encouraged us with, when we're moving in a new direction, we're a new step, a new place of growth spiritually, to visualize a tree like a little sapling and being protected by energetic boundary of a tree. And be careful about who we talk to about this, because there's a moment in the beginning where it can feel very vulnerable to reasonable doubt, very vulnerable to other people's opinion about the intuition. That's the right path. And insecurity within ourselves. What's this going to mean if I head in this direction? That can also play a part. When he said in willpower, fear or doubt, right? The laziness. But all of these things were in my mind today, and I'll just check our time to see. I think that's enough. I think that, it's just this, we're being called to open our hearts, as it says in the purification, and invite the masters in, invite divine grace in, and it will come, right? It will come, and it will guide us, and we are capable of this, and that's the ultimate teaching. It's our birthright to be fully realized. We are, Master said, already free. We're already free. So that's the essence of the reading and the teaching today. Thank you.
Walk like a man, even though you walk alone. Why court approval once the road is known? Let come who will, but if they all turn home, the goal still awaits you. Your dream is not our own. Your soul knows the answer. Go on alone. Live life your heart. Bless everything that's grown. Fear not the loving. All this world's your own. Make rich the soil, but once the seed is sown, seek freedom, don't linger. Go on alone. Walk like a man, even though you walk alone. Why court approval once the road is known? Let come who will, but if
This is called In the Garden, and it's a piece that Yogananda loved. So it's from his era, and it's visualized as we sing it, Mary Magdalene in the garden, as at the point at which Jesus is appearing after his passing.
I come to the garden alone, while the dew is still on the roses, and the voice I hear falling on my ear, the Son of God discloses, and he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own, and the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. He speaks, and the sound of his voice is so sweet, the birds hush their singing, and the melody that he gave to me within my heart is ringing, and he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own, and the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever